Yo. Welcome again to another edition of the Men Who Cry podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, review, tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend. If you do not promote this podcast or help me with it, I'm supposed to assume that you do not wipe after you go to the bathroom. On today's episode, we are talking heavy NBA in a lot of different ways. This will definitely be a Dear NBA or Dear NBA Media kind of conversation. But to kick us off, we will be starting off with the headline game from the other day. We are recording this on Monday, a little bit later in the day for you guys. But we will be talking about the Boston Celtics matchup against the New York Knickerbockers. The Boston Celtics are rounding into form. They've won 11 of their last 12 games and are looking like the clear-cut favorites to not only win the Eastern Conference, but to win the NBA title overall. From the Celtics perspective, it's interesting to see that this team has basically been this kind of level of good for the better part of a decade, really since 2016, 2017. The 2015-2016 season was the last time that this group did not at least make the Eastern Conference Finals. They've made the Eastern Conference Finals every year since that time period, since the Kyrie, Gordon Hayward era of the Boston Celtics. And this team is going on to try and challenge to see if they are not just one of these one-hit wonders that we've had over the last 7 seasons, where we've had a different champion going all the way back since the Golden State Warriors went back-to-back in 15, winning the 15 and the 16 championship. And it's interesting to see because there's nothing about this team. I shouldn't say nothing. Let me rephrase that. This isn't a team that you would, I guess, look at per se with their 2 main guys and say that this is going to be an all-time great team. However, if you look at their record over the last 2 seasons, their postseason record, which I think is the biggest indicator of a great team, they only lost 3 postseason games last year. And it doesn't really look like there's anyone that's going to give them a real fight. Now, we'll see what happens with Cleveland once we get to the Eastern Conference Finals, if that's the matchup that we see. Whether or not that they'll be challenged before they get back to potentially the NBA Finals. And the legacy part of this will be fascinating because if you look at, again, all the accolades that someone like Jayson Tatum has accumulated, you would think that this guy is not only no doubt about a Hall of Famer, which he is the fact that he should be regarded, I think, as one of the best players of this era. You know, if we're looking at everyone who kind of came into the NBA, really came to form of the NBA of this last 5 seasons, right? We're really looking at the 2020s going forward. I think a lot of it is the fact that LeBron, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant have been so good for so long that the turning the page of this era hasn't really occurred, right? Because you kind of have some guys that are like in the in-between stage. Jokic is 30 years old. Joel Embiid is 30 years old. Giannis Antetokounmpo just turned 30 years old. Those guys were essentially kind of the holdovers because they're so much younger than the aforementioned players I just mentioned. And all of them outside of Embiid have won a championship. All 3 of those men have won MVPs. And now you have this kind of new era of players, but Jayson Tatum's kind of the outlier of that because he's so much older than Ant. He's so much older than SGA. Yet he's not as old as the guys I just mentioned, and you think he has so much runway left. But he's going to make another first-team All-NBA. It's kind of like not even really a question that this guy's going to be in there. He's going to probably finish anywhere between 4th and 6th for MVP. Kind of in that range, you know, maybe he falls to 7th just because, like voting happens in a weird way. Guys can split votes. But his aura, I can't believe I just fucking said that. His perception, his gravitas just doesn't scream to be a guy to be one of the faces of the NBA. And I think it's something I want to talk about later on this podcast or later just over on this show is that I really think that the court of gold encapsulated the fact that he didn't take that kind of he didn't have his moments. And I think that's really the biggest thing of him is that his resume says one thing, but when you watch him play and you watch him for these big moments, the times where it is the times that I remember Steph Curry made plays, LeBron James made plays, Kevin Durant made plays, these guys that have kind of dominated the NBA over the last 15 seasons. And Tatum doesn't have any of those. He wasn't good in the finals, though. I thought his defense was pretty good. And he wasn't really good in the Olympics. He got benched in several points and frankly just didn't play well. So I wonder if going forward for this playoff run, if he is not personally motivated to say, no, this is my time, right? Because I think in now the era, I would say we in between LeBron and whenever Wembanyama becomes the best player in the league, you're going to have multiple guys kind of take that title or take that belt. I don't think you make your claim of I rank here as far as players in the NBA in the regular season. We've seen plenty of guys have great regular seasons. Guys, show up, can put up numbers. But it's about, can you be, an aforementioned Draymond Green quote, a 16-game player? And while no one would sit up here and say that Jayson Tatum isn't one of those players, when you get to the super high top of it, you got to bring your best when your best is required. Now, I'm not saying this is anything that he can't do. People would argue that Steph Curry didn't really play well in any finals games until later on. And he kind of needed that 22 championship to kind of like stamp any lasting question marks around him. And I really think that's the last level that Jayson Tatum is at. He's obviously has a ring. Just mentioned he's going to make the all NBA team again this year. I don't think there's going to be a year, unless he just doesn't qualify in terms of games played, that he won't make, at worst, an all NBA team, let alone a first team all NBA. And he's just a guy who has so much versatility and skills, and yet he hasn't really captured it in the time where I think everyone's watching. So that to me will be the biggest kind of thing of looking for them going forward. I think that it would be shocking if they don't make the NBA Finals. I do believe in Cleveland. I think that this matchup against Cleveland later, I think it's either later this week or next week, but they're playing again soon. That will be kind of the last little nook of like, okay, like, are these guys going to have a real fight getting to the NBA Finals, or are they going to kind of do what they did last season, kind of smoke everyone going forward? Now on to the second participant of that game, your New York Knicks. The Knicks have had, I would say, one of the oddest seasons of their history, recent history. As of right now, they are on track to win the most games they've won since the turn of the century, if they keep the same pace. At worst, they will come close to at least having the second most wins they've had this decade, this century, whether or not they surpass 54 wins. Right now, they're right around that pace. And yet, it feels as if this is one of the most miserable seasons I think some of their fans have ever had. Now, part of that is due to just expectations and simply the fact that I think over the weekend, after they got destroyed by Cleveland and they got destroyed once again by Boston, pushing their record against OKC, Cleveland, and Boston to 0-7. And more so the fact, I think the biggest thing, at least from my takeaway from it, is that was the last, I think, confirmed game where you know for a fact the team going across from you that is a contender, that's a team that's, has almost as many wins as you or more wins as you of anything of that sort, is playing for it, right? The next time they don't play either the Celtics or Cleveland again until April 2nd. That's when they play Cleveland again. By that point, maybe Cleveland is still trying for the 1 seed. You never know, but it pretty much kind of locked up everything. It seems that everything will be locked up at that point. And I think for a lot of people, and I'll speak for myself as a fan, is that their season ended on Sunday. I don't think there's anyone who kind of believes that they'll be able to defeat either Cleveland or Boston in a playoff series when they face them. And the other part of this, I think this is the most important part, is that they can't move unless there is a collapse by them in some way. They not only are 4 games up on the 4th seed, which currently is the Indiana Pacers, they won the season series against both them and Milwaukee. So essentially, they have 5 and 6 game leads on the next 2 teams behind them. And now they've lost 3 times to Boston. They've lost the season series to Boston. They essentially now have a 4 game gap between them and the Celtics, even if they beat them the next time that they play. Their season series is over. So they are firmly stuck at being the 3rd seed, which is good in the sense that you're going to have a first round playoff series at home. You can start at home. You're going to avoid the play-in, and you're going to face a team that either A, you match up well with in the Milwaukee Bucks, a team that you have, when you're healthy, a team that you have shown that you can beat multiple times this year in Indiana Pacers, or just going to have a really, really young team who's making their first playoff appearance in years in the Detroit Pistons. And, Orlando can kind of come through. We'll see. But it pretty much looks like it's going to be one of those 3 teams they will face in round 1. And I fully expect them to beat them. But that's it, And it's hard, I think, for fans to kind of have that kind of moment where, there's 26 more games left in the year for them, and none of them matter. They can go out there. I shouldn't say none of them matter. I think they can go out there and win a ton of games, and I expect them to win a lot more of the games, even though they still have the hardest strength of schedule of anyone left in the season. I still expect them to go out there and win their fair share of games. Why? Because they're an elite team. They're just not a team that's going to win the championship this year, or should be considered to be a team that should be considered to win the championship this year. I think it gets back to now the question of what lever are you willing to pull? See, when you make a basketball team, when you're building out a roster, there's certain levers you have to pull in order to get to become a championship team, hopefully, right? Now, all these levers guarantee you win a championship. These are kind of steps that you kind of have to do. First things first, you have to get your superstar. You have to get the guy who you think, okay, when we get to the playoffs, when we get to the championship rounds, this guy, we believe, can be the best player at multiple times in a series for us to win a game, to win the series, okay? Knicks got that. Boom. Check. Okay. Now, we're going to need now a secondary star, tertiary star who can either help us win games, or his overall impact of the game makes it so that our star player has an ease to him, whether it's lightening up his offensive load, whether it's not helping him out on the defensive end if it's a subpar defensive player, whether it's just a guy who to get buckets. You need to have a guy, a secondary all NBA caliber player to go along with your player, right? Boom. They got that with number 2. Number 3 setup is building out the rest of the roster that complements your star players, right? Helps them in their deficiencies and makes them what to do. Essentially, build out the rest of the roster. Check with the rest of the team. The Knicks are now at that stage where the next levers you kind of pull are what are going to really define what this era will be and determine whether or not it will be a championship team or not. The first lever is truly sacrificing everything. Going all in. We are talking about what the Suns look like, right? Where once this Suns thing is over, it's done. They pushed all their chips in. They have nothing else to play for. They just lost to the Raptors. They're 2-6, I believe, in this month. They're done. They might by happenstance make the play in, but they're done. It's over. And now for them, it's like, okay, this is obviously done. We got to blow this thing up. Who are the guys that we are keeping for next season, or which one of these guys are we moving to get for picks or whatnot? The Knicks still have that, right? They still have guys outside of their core players that can still fetch them better players for them to get. They have Mitchell Robinson expiring. contract. They have a really low contract inducement price for a good player. They also have rookies. They still have pick swaps, yada, yada, yada. The next lever and the final lever that I think is ultimately pulled and should be the last lever pulled is firing the coach. And I have been someone who has defended Thomas Thibodeau for the longest time. I think he's the best thing that has ever happened to this organization outside of Jalen Brunson in the last, since 2000. I think he completely gets and understands how New York works. I think that he is a man about business. However, you cannot sit up there and say that the last couple of games did not make you at least consider at some point that this coach has to go. I always say this about coaching in any profession, right? There's always a segment of any fan base. The number is insurmountable. You'll never really know. That just wants you fired. Whether it's because of your play style, whether it's the cut of your jib, whether it's the way you talk to the media, it doesn't really matter. They want you fired. Okay? Doesn't even matter how many games you win, how many championships you win. There will always be a group of people that want you fired. And I think the key of coaching is to always make sure that pendulum never swings to the majority. You can always have maybe 60-40% of people want you fired, but if it's 60-40, you'd be good. Because the 60 tend to care about winning, right? As long as you win, you get the games going, you'll be enough, right? The issue is that when those regular season wins don't add up to a championship, that dial ticks and ticks and ticks and ticks and ticks and ticks until you're finally getting the pink slip. Now, I don't think Tom has done anything to warrant to get fired. And to be frank, unless they lose in round one of the series of the playoffs this year, I think it keeps his job. I think the lever that I just mentioned before about cashing in your final chips and really going bare bones with it, I think will happen prior to him being let go. But make no mistake about it, that noise, that ticking is sliding more and more to the left. And his contributions will be forgotten about ultimately because fans could care less about that. I just ultimately say a lot of times is if you're firing a coach in order to win a championship, you better be damn sure you got everything set up to go. And now you are really hitting the gas with everything because a lot of fans will oftentimes point to obviously the good examples, right? Mark Jackson was fired. Steve Kerr came in. Those guys were able to win a championship. Win 3 championships, they got Kevin Durant. Rest is history. You look at Dwayne Casey in Toronto, fired him. Next year, they got Nick Nurse, that won the championship, right? I oftentimes feel like people just forget that there are more examples than not of you hitting that lever and it just not working out, like Tom Thibodeau and Chicago Bulls. They've still been bad since he left. I believe they've made the playoffs once since he's not been their coach. And that was back in like 2012 or something like that, 2013. You could look at something like Doc Rivers, right? Whether it was with the Clippers, whether it was in Philadelphia last season. Fire the coach. Doc Rivers is terrible as the coach. Joel Embiid's body breaking down, and now they got Nick Nurse, the guy who sees the opportunity to win the championship to come in to coach Philadelphia, and now I guess he sucks at coaching, right? Ultimately, all fans have segments of their fan base that hate the coach, and it's just part of it. I simply just offer and say that just because that there's a magic box out there that you think can get the coach to be better does not mean that the coach will be better for you or your team moving forward. Now, that's not saying that Tom Thibodeau will not be fired. If I'm just giving my personal opinion, I'm pretty convinced he's getting fired by next season, the end of next season, just because it's the business, right? He would have been coaching the team at that point for 7 seasons, which is by far the longest tenured coach they've had since, I don't even think Van Gundy or Pat Riley got 7 seasons. Like 7 years in New York, that's a long ass time. You know, they want you fired after 2 months. So I honestly think that having your coach just be fired and trying to get some new, whether it's a younger guy or some different guy to come in and do this, I don't think is realistic. I do not think that he will last. I'm unsure whether or not he will be the coach that will lead them to a championship, but I don't think they're as far away as they can. I just simply am making the case and the point that that dial that is pulled at the end is a dial that should be reserved for the end, because once you do that, there are no more moves left. You have done everything that you have done to be able to try and win the championship. And that's a road that I don't think many fans have properly accessed and understand that that's where things go. Sliding on to a more bigger topic, we're going to do a nice little 10,000 foot view. And we talked about this the last time that we podcast about the Four Nations and how that went and was objectively widely successful. I think, unfortunately, now there's just been a push in a weird way to have a constant negative discord around the NBA. And I think what has happened now is that people have realized that if you talk about the NBA in this kind of way, it simply gets a level of engagement that I ultimately think people have decided to care more about, instead of having a real and, I think, an honest conversation about how the league actually is. You hear a lot of misnomers about the league, things like no one's playing defense, or they shoot too many threes, or load management, things like that. And by and large part, all those things are fake. Like, they just are. I mean, the NBA literally has a rule now against quote unquote load management, right? It's a 65 game rule that guys have to play, right? And I mean, I think maybe Kawhi is the only guy, but I feel like we haven't talked about Kawhi on the national stage for so long. Who exactly is the person that's quote unquote load managing? Embiid's knee is done. Like, it's done. Like, he's hurt. You know, this isn't like anything. And look, coming from me, right? I'm just saying, this ain't Embiid's safe space, right? So I'm simply telling you, the man clearly cannot play, right? Kawhi has had numerous injuries and numerous times has been out. Now, this year was the knee, and I think he also missed some time because of what the tragedy that was happening in Los Angeles with the housings and all the fires. But for the most part, Kawhi has played. Okay, LeBron, I'm pretty sure, is going to qualify for an All NBA spot, and I'll be pretty shocked if he doesn't make it. But guys are playing, so this idea that load management is still happening or still part of it is just not true anymore. Same thing with the quote-unquote they shoot too many threes. I'm sorry. Are we going to go back to shooting long twos? Like, did y'all love seeing David West out there shoot those long twos? It's crazy. I remember I looked up and I saw Carmelo's, one of his games against, I think it might have been the 50 points on 50 jumpers. You know how many 2-pointers he just shot? Like long twos? Like baseline twos? There's no way in hell that Melo would take those shots now. He would back up to the 3-point line. He could have had 60 points in the game. And this isn't like, I can understand this idea of incentivizing drives. I think there gets a point sometimes where the NBA can fall too much into threes, especially for teams that are not good at shooting threes, right? There's a way to generate threes instead of I'm just going to shoot this shot even with someone standing in my face, right? There's a level of offensive creativity that goes into getting open threes. And it comes down to this, like, these two things are kind of almost eating at each other, right? If teams are shooting more threes by nature and shooting them at a better clip, by nature, there's going to be more scoring. So how could you then say there's no defense in the league when they are doing something that teams just simply were not doing in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s? The volume wasn't there. And talk about defense. How are you guarding guys like Cat, who's shooting from half court, Kristaps Porzingis, Jayson Tatum, who can weave in, step back, and hit a nice little three in your eye, Luka Doncic, who's just doing whatever he wants out there on the court, Nikola Jokic. Like, these guys are not like dudes you can just do X, Y, and Z and take their game away, right? Like, these are incredibly skilled players who all play differently than each other. And I just feel as if that the noise has gotten so loud that we've lost the put in for the sauce. And I think what ultimately has happened with this, and I think that what has been the most detrimental to this, is that there has always been a racial element with the NBA, like it or not. Okay, we're going back to the dress code. We're going back to having to wear suits. The AI of the NBA has always been the crack epidemic that happened in the league. Black America has always been at the soul of this NBA, of this league rather. And the fact that this has now almost become like a punching bag in the public eye is been something that's, I think, it's almost a level of distasteful, I would say. Because especially when it's calls are coming from quote unquote inside the house, when the players are criticizing the league and they are part of the reason for the criticism, it just doesn't make any sense, right? And I'm not here to say that there should not be criticism around. Like, there's things to critique, but the vast scale of these things are not talked about in the NFL. We do not talk about how shitty the kickoff rules were, or the fact that they can't start shit on time, right? Or what is a catch? Can you hit quarterbacks? We talk about how the biggest thing I remember when they made a lot of the rule changes to the quarterbacks was you can't hit quarterbacks this way, you can't hit quarterbacks that way. And those were real conversations that happened, and then it went away, right? Because people play fantasy football, they don't care about the numbers like that, right? The whole conversation now with hockey having this big moment, right? Like, oh, these Four Nations things, they're not doing it again. It basically all just went away next season. And again, it was a nice spark for them, but it doesn't, I'm sorry, is anyone out here just a new fan of the league after that? Maybe they got some tertiary people, but that wasn't some level of impact that I think is going to change like the levers of how the league is going to be. Now, I think going forward, it'll be interesting conversation of whether or not certain athletes will start picking hockey instead of other sports. But again, hockey is also a super expensive sport to play, and most of this country doesn't get that cold. You know, like, it gets cold, but not cold enough for you ice skating, you know, where most of the people live. So I think that the NBA is the one thing that I think is a good thing, and one of the things that just doesn't happen anymore is that we don't really see like new people come into place. I mean, the guys on TNT have been on for 30 years. And I think while that's a good thing to have, there's also a downside to that. And I think the biggest downside to that is the fact that they have not grown with the league at the same rate. And I think that the desires of what fans want now has changed from 20 years ago, right? You can have a Stephen A. Smith or a Charles Barkley up there and just basically go on 10 rants a day. And there'll always be people that will still love the rants and still love when people get crapped on and calling Anthony Davis. He had a huge fight with physicality. That was the whole joke of him. Or street clothes. That was the nickname that they gave the guy. And while they'll always be there, I think there's a large part of fans who just want you to break down the game and tell them what actually happened in the game and care about, you know, the game. And I just think the NBA, for whatever reason, does a large disservice of that. Whereas if I just look at like the NFL, I feel like there's just pockets for that, right? There's pockets where you can just talk about how the QB plays and how well he did or how he didn't do. But I can think of multiple podcasts off the top of my head that break down what the defensive linemen have to do in this alignment. What are they trying to do when they run cover 3? Why are they playing this type of coverage? And I think a large part of it is because the fact that we look at the NFL as such a team game, and there's really only one individual that really will get a lot of the criticism, right? It'll be the quarterback, right? But most of the guys on the field get talked about in units, right? The defense didn't play well. The secondary didn't play well. The O-line wasn't able to block, right? Whereas in basketball, it devolves down into like your best player for the most part. And I'm not saying that the NFL or the NBA has to completely adopt the NFL. I don't necessarily think that's like a good way for things to go. However, I just think we should be able to expect better coverage from, the guys that are getting paid so much money. And we'll see. We'll see if this Amazon piece will come through. I think that's really a good thing to happen. Even with NBC hiring someone like Gilbert, allegedly, maybe we'll see Gilbert Arenas. I was almost saying Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, but Gilbert Arenas. I believe Melo got hired for NBC, but we'll see. None of this stuff is like officially out, but we'll see how that goes. But Dirk Nowitzki and Blake Griffin, that's official. They're on Amazon now. And hopefully they will bring in fans and actually talk about the game in a real way and not have to just have these blah talking points all the time. All right, guys. Thank you guys again for listening. Going to be back up with you guys later this week. Like I said, make sure you guys like, subscribe, review, tell a friend, and I'll catch you guys later. All right. Peace out.